thank you very much, everybody, for joining. For people that don't have their cameras on, if you're able to turn them on, it's lovely to see you. We do appreciate if you stay on mute for now, just because there's always some background noise from somewhere. So we'd like to keep that to a minimum. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat, and we will have some time, hopefully, for questions at the end so that you can interact with people as well. So just having said that, so it's a little bit of basic housekeeping. So I should introduce myself. My name is Jessica Jones. I'm a team lead and senior recruiter with ER Global for some years now. And I'm very pleased to be hosting this webinar and to have helped to put it together as well. I'm going to share my screen so that people can see what we have planned to present for you. And oops, I'll have to do it the other way. I'll do some introductions then for our participants, meaning the people that are on the panel for us that have come to speak with us today about all these different topics. I'll start by introducing the one person here who really doesn't need an introduction, our Miri. Miri, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for coming this afternoon. We wanted to, every few months, we kind of pick a country and decide to dig in and help you. So for those of you who doesn't know me, I'm Miri. I'm a managing director in ER Global. We help Israeli companies to hire people overseas. And I'm very pleased to have the panel here, which we will present shortly. We kind of went through all the questions that you have had before, and we're going to answer them and tackle issues that we know that would be an interest for you. It's all very, very tactical, very operational, and it's not theoretical, because that's how we do things. And Jessica, thank you for preparing everything. Thank you for the panel's friends, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Mary, as well. So yeah, so Mary put a little bit of context into it for us. So you'll see we have a number of topics, as Mary said, that we've covered, which are based on the questions that we got from you. But now I'd like to introduce our panel that have joined us today and that are sharing their expertise and their knowledge with us, and we'll be answering some questions. So I'll start with basically with how the pictures are laid out, which is in no particular order, but you know, it's just there. So I would like to introduce Zohar first, also known as Sam. So Sam is joining us today. She is the Human Resources Manager at Slink.io. So Slink is a logistics automation software provider. Before she joined Slink, Sam worked for 3 different Israeli headquartered startups, helping to build and scale their global teams. Since 2017, Sam tells us that she has been living her American dream in Dallas, Texas. She, having a BA in business management and an SHRM-CP certification, Sam has a passion for workplace relationship management and global and cultural effectiveness. So Sam, you're very welcome, and thank you so much for all of your time and for joining us today. We're going to be delighted.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Next, I would like to introduce Joe Treitman. Joe is the founder of the Acuity Group, specializing in HR positions since 2004. She has over 20 years recruiting experience since '97 and has worked with firms like Revlon, the Westfield Group, and of course now as principal of Acuity. Joe has an MBA from NYU Stern, which is one of the top business schools in the US. And Joe's expertise is in leveraging her corporate HR career to bring a lot of careful attention to the interpersonal skills that are required for each company specifically and its own culture, while also being really amazing at managing candidate relationships over years and years. And I say amazing, and this is my word and not Joe's, because I've seen her in action, and she's really brilliant at it. So Joe, you're very welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to sharing whatever I can and hearing any other questions that people have as they listen in. So thank you and welcome to everybody.
Thank you. And finally, I would like to introduce Alex Bird. Alex Bird is a member of the New York Israel Bar Association and England Law Society. He graduated from the University of Liverpool Law School in England and Columbia University School of Law in New York. Alex handles complex business immigration and family reunification and also deportation cases in the US. He represents companies and private individuals and is also a partner with Bird and Klaus law firm in New York City. So Alex, you're very welcome. And thank you so much as well for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Jessica. I'll be glad to contribute.
Thank you. Okay, guys, so we have, basically we have like two different components for this. So one is the sort of what we're calling the HR perspectives, which is something that is very important to us. And then also a legal component that we will bring Alex into, or, you know, what Alex is going to speaking to us about. So from the HR point of view, a number of topics that were identified based on the questions from the attendees today. The first. Sorry, somebody is could put yourself on mute would be terrific. Thank you.
Jessica, I'm muting everyone, and then you can just unmute yourself.
Okay, super. Can I? Yes, I can. Okay, super. Thanks, Mary. Okay, so the first thing that we want to discuss that is something that's very important to people was around interviewing best practice for Israeli firms interviewing candidates in the US. Obviously, there are some differences in the way that you talk to people and specifically questions that you can and cannot and should not ask, and how you get around some of that to get the information that you're actually trying to discover. So there's some information on the slide, obviously, but I'd like to ask Sam to start and just maybe talk us through a few points there in a little bit more detail.
Sure, thank you. So I think when it comes to interviewing best practice and what not to ask, there's a lot of similarities, right? And a lot of it is really common sense. We really want, the one thing we want to avoid is any loopholes of discrimination. Discrimination is a big thing here in the US. Well, avoiding discrimination, I should say, is a big thing. So some of the topics or categories here on the screen are the things that we want to avoid asking about, at least directly. We definitely, you know, we need to understand what is it that we really want to know about the candidate. What we want to know is whether or not they are a good fit for the role and the organization. So, of course, we want to structure our questions around that in a legal format. So, for example, if we cannot allow for any reason candidates who are or have been using drugs in the past, you would not want to ask, are you or have you been using drugs in the past? What you can ask is, do you feel comfortable taking a drug test? That's a legal format of the question. And that should mostly give you the answer that you're looking for, the information that you're looking for. Another big thing that I would mention about interviewing in the US, I think as Israelis, we're really used to kind of an icebreaker of an opening statement. Please tell me about yourself. While in Israel, people are prepared to answer that question. They typically have kind of, you know, their speech of what they would tell you about themselves, what they would like to disclose, what they wouldn't. Americans often get caught off by surprise by that question because what do you actually want to know? What does it mean? Tell me about yourself. So they would typically go the professional experience route, and they would just read out their resume to you, which I mean, it's a waste of time. You have their resume in front of you. So my recommendation is really to try to format a different question that is more direct, not as generic as tell me about yourself. And then there's more of a chance that you would find the information that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you. Joe, did you want to add something to that?
I want to add a few things into that. So specifically, you wouldn't want to ask about things that are specific to their personal lives. For example, if you're not going to ask about marital status or family status, but you can ask if the commute is going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And that may give you that information, but really the point that Sam was making is it's the part that's relevant to the job. Can you commute to the job location? So that's an okay question to ask. And with respect to compensation, that's a pretty significant change that has occurred in the US about, I don't recall exactly, but I'm going to say about 2 or 3 years ago. You used to be able to specifically ask about salary history, what was your base pay, what was any compensation, other monies that you were paid in terms of bonus dollars or anything like that. You cannot ask for anything that is specific in that regard. What you can ask is if they were paid a bonus, you can say, does your compensation package include a bonus or equity? But you can't ask what the actual value of it is. If it is a bonus, you can ask if it's routinely paid. And with respect to compensation, while you can't ask the dollars to say, what are you or what have you been making, you can instead ask, what are you looking for in compensation? And that will allow them to say, yes, I'm looking for a base salary of $80,000 or whatever it might be. And you're also able to, in that phraseology, very often, oh, excuse me, it's bad timing here. It's a shared office. In that scenario, they often will tell you what their current compensation is. They will very often say so. If they do, they are called, that's referred to as volunteering. And you need to turn around back to them and say, thank you for volunteering. And if it's a scenario where you're going to be sharing that information with somebody else, then you also need to ask that candidate, are you okay if I share the salary that you just volunteered? So you must get their permission before sharing that information or even writing it down.
Mm-hmm. Joe, I have a question actually. Is it legal to, you know, if someone volunteers that they're on, I don't know, let's say 250K OTE, is it legal to ask about the base and commission split, because you're kind of finding out the exact information then?
Yes, you can ask them if that is total cash or if it's split between a compensation and between a base salary and a bonus, but you can't ask them what the details of it.
Okay, right. So the way, yeah, okay. So you can't ask the exact details there, but you can ask in terms of what salary they're telling you they want to be making, what kind of a split they would be looking for there, which will give you some sense of it anyway. But that's the point. Yeah, got it. Okay, super. Yes. Good. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good there. Was there anything else you felt was important to add there, Joe or Sam? No, I think we're okay. Okay, so another one of the questions, and it's linked to this as well, has to do with, you know, how to evaluate candidates. So obviously the interview is the primary way that we at least initially evaluate candidates that we're screening. We move on from that to thinking about the different kinds of evaluation tools that are available to us for that. Sam, do you want to talk us through this one?
Sure. So again, very similar to what we see in Israel is the different tools that we have for evaluating candidates. I think the number one thing on this is to really reflect to candidates at the very beginning of the process what they can expect. What would the process look like? Is it just a series of interviews? If yes, who are they going to meet in the process? Are we going to include any sort of assessment or presentation, any role play that we want them to prepare or take part in? That's something that they need to know beforehand. You'll find that some candidates will say, I'm sorry, this is not for me. I'm not taking any assessments at this point in my career. And that's fine. At least, you know, you and them have not wasted your time on something that is not going to happen. In terms of personality testing, there are so many out there. There's anything from Sales Drive and various other tools that the Gallup Strengths. And I think that if you talk to American candidates, oftentimes you'll find that they tell you about themselves in the interview process through the lens of their results of those assessments that they've previously taken, because those terms are widely used, especially when it comes to salespeople. So that's something pretty common that you'll see. One suggestion that I have is really to understand whether or not the tool that you have selected for assessment that is not, you know, the behavioral interviews or their presentations or whatnot. If you are doing an aptitude testing tool or a personality testing, make sure that it's accredited or standardized for the local locality where you're using it. My recommendation is probably not to use a foreign tool that was translated into the local language. That could definitely have some problems with that. Different locations have different standards of what is okay to ask in those tests. So that is my recommendation. I can tell you that in the past, I did use a tool that was Americanized, but not enough, and that became a problem because candidates started saying, "Well, you're not supposed to be asking us those questions on the assessment." So that's just my recommendation. Try to find a tool that is widely common and used in the locality where you operate.
Perfect. Very good. Thank you. Joe, I think you had a point or two to make here as well.
Yes, one of the things to bear in mind, thank you, Jess, to bear in mind with the assessment tools is bear in mind the candidate experience. They are often interviewing the company as much as we're interviewing them, and you want them to have a positive experience. So that's part of what Sam was saying, no surprises. Let them know upfront what it's going to be. If it's going to be something such as the personality test, like the caliper test or any of those, or Myers-Briggs, that are going to get to their leadership style or the personality problem-solving style, we try to put them at ease and say there are no wrong answers. You just have to be yourself. So you want to be very approachable about what that testing is going to be like. The aptitude testing can often be kind of a math and verbal thing, just to make sure that people can do, really understand language skills, really understand mathematical skills. The other thing that's been interesting, that's been added in more commonly now, are the recorded video interviews. And candidates tend not to like those. They're very efficient for the companies.
Joe, I think you're frozen. Can everybody hear me okay?
I try to put a positive note on it. It's 2 or 3 screening questions. It's 2
Sorry.
or 3 screening questions that a candidate will answer with a limited time frame. So you just need to prepare the candidate. If you're going to use something like that, they just need to understand what the parameters are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think the one thing I'd like to add here as well is for these like large candidate assessments, and I'm actually just going to move on to the next slide because we have a couple of just links to share with you, not things that we're specifically recommending, but ones that we know that are commonly used, that are out there. And the one thing I will just I guess just to mention there as well is to keep in mind the time commitment that a candidate will be putting into something like this as well. So if you choose, you as the hiring company, if you choose something that is going to take the candidate 3 or 4 or 5 hours to complete, be conscious of that investment from the candidate, and also how that's going to affect their experience, as Joe is referring to. So I think that's it's really important as well, just to make a note of that you're not giving, as a company, that you're not giving the impression that you're trying to automate things too much, but this is just an additional tool to the interviews, and to giving them the opportunity to meet the people in the company. Because remember, we're trying to get a sense that we're finding a good match here, and that the match is good for both sides, for the company and for the candidate that we're hiring. So I don't want to spend any time on this one, but just to know the information is there. And as always, we'll be sending out information to all of the attendees after anyway. So all of these will be mentioned there as well. There are things that you can check out and investigate whether they're suitable for your own hiring needs as a company. So let's speak about, in terms of like the end evaluation process, the famous reference checks. Joe, I'm sorry, actually, Sam, would you start here? Because I know Joe has a couple of nice points.
I think we skipped one slide though. So
did we?
I think,
sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out. Oh, you're absolutely right. We're going backwards. Sorry, guys. We're jumping around.
There we go.
Background checks.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Yeah, no problem. So again, on background checks, the list is very, very long of what kind of tests you can have the candidate undergo. So the first question is, what do we want to know, and what is acceptable for us as an organization? If we find out that somebody possessed drugs 10 years ago, are we okay with that today? If we find out that somebody has a speeding ticket, is that okay? So really, before we decide what it is, and before we decide on a vendor, try to understand what it is that we're trying to find out about a candidate and what is acceptable for us. Then there are so many vendors out there for background checks. I'm not going to talk about that, but more about what's important to structure. So we need to make sure that we have a written consent from the candidate. We need to make sure that we safely store all of the sensitive information. Make sure know that everything from their social security number to their history is on there. Sometimes their credit score is there. So we really need to be careful about how we treat the information. And then finally, we also need to understand, again, like I said, which assessments, which checks we want them to undergo. And like I said, the list is very, very long.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Joe, did you want to add anything to that?
There really isn't anything to add. It's a pretty standard process. There are a lot of third-party services that will do that, because checking the, for example, checking the criminal, education is easy because they'll say the school, you go to the school, but the criminal records can be state by state in different counties. So it really is a lot more efficient to use a third party for that service.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on now to the slide that I have already shown people. So let's talk about, sorry guys, I think my computer is not playing with me today. Let's talk about reference checks. Sam, I'll ask you to start.
Sure. So with reference check, I think this is something that we really need to take with a grain of salt, right? Because know that the references or the referees that are provided by candidates are pre-screened, right? So the people that you get to speak with formally, that the candidate provided to you, are people that they want you to speak with, right? So one thing that is more commonly done these days is back channel references. I think in that way you can probably find out more genuine information, some things that you probably wouldn't find out from the formal referees. One thing I would mention about this is that we need to make sure that we ask the candidate first, is it okay if we ask mutual connections about you and about your previous experience or their experience working with you? That's super important. Otherwise, you might be non-compliant if you just go around their back, and you can risk their current job. So just make sure that you communicate this to the candidate, and then you should be good to go.
Great, thank you. Joe, tell us.
Okay, and one of the things that I wanted to add on to there is that here the music bullet that Jess put on the screen is because I have one client who liked to, a hiring manager who liked to do those reference checks personally herself. Because as Sam would say, people will put up people they know who will give them a good reference, but there often can be things about the way they said it, the tone of voice, the choice of words that they use, and you can get you sometimes can get a true sense depending on how that is presented. So it is nice to do at least one reference check, but bearing in mind, companies are not legally required. Many companies make it a policy not to allow reference checks and will only allow you to verify their dates of employment and their title. So you may not be able to get one from a current employer or even a past employer. So it's just something to bear in mind. It's only going to be a piece of information. It's not going to be helping you make a decision by itself.
Yeah, very good point. Okay.
One thing I would add to that, thank you, Joe, is the question, is this person eligible for rehire? Because that question is legal. You can definitely ask that. And if the person is not eligible for rehire, it's a classification that every employer puts in when there's a termination, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. That is something that they should be able to disclose. If the person is not eligible for rehire, that should probably tell you something. So that's definitely a question I would ask any referee.
Yeah.
And to add on to that is to say, would you rehire that person? You could also ask that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a lovely way to actually to get maybe, I think, an honest answer, because I recently conducted a couple of reference checks myself, and I know that one of the things I really love to hear from the previous employer was saying that, if I had a job for this person now, I would absolutely grab them. And I thought, well, that's wow, that's very meaningful. Okay, let's move on and let's talk about another topic that is very close to our hearts: salary benchmarks. We always have, or very often have, questions about how to actually benchmark the salaries. There's a number of different ways to do this. We've put some links here together for you. These are good places to check. Obviously, you can ask us. Obviously, candidates also will tell you. You'll gather that information very quickly. Anyone that is in recruitment and is recruiting for similar kinds of positions is going to have a pretty good sense on the different localities what the salaries are. But these 3 links that are provided here, 1, 2, 3, 4 links actually, are a pretty good place to start if you really don't know. And I put a note here as well on this, just remember the value of the signing bonus. So something that can really make the difference between, you know, being able to hire someone or not, someone that's, you know, a candidate, someone that you're very interested in, and, you know, maybe they're waiting for, you know, some kind of a bonus to come through. Maybe the overall package isn't quite as attractive, but they do like you and you do like them. A once-off signing bonus, even something that can be post-dated to, you know, 2, 3, 4 months after, you know, successful employment, it can really, really sweeten the deal. So that's always something that you have up your sleeve. So I think that's probably as much time as we want to spend on that right now. Let's talk about the benchmarks. I'm sorry, the benefits. That's a huge topic. The first place I will ask Sam to speak to this, but there's the sherm.org site that we have there. We can't do really much better. Well, obviously we could do better, but the best place to gather information for the specific localities and for all the various legislations that exist, sherm.org is probably your best friend. So that is a place that you should spend a lot of time if you're trying to hire into the US and you have specific questions. Sam.
Yeah, thank you. So benefits, what a huge topic, right? I can talk about this for days and days. I think that the few things that candidates would typically want to get an understanding of is how many days of vacation do they get? Federal holidays, that's pretty standard. Typically it's 10 days, give or take, where the banks are closed, and then most employers will typically give their employees pay time off. And then in many companies, the week around Christmas will probably be time off or company shutdown, anything along those lines. In terms of their medical, dental, and vision, I can definitely tell you that as a former Israeli, that is something that's really hard to get a grasp of, right? In Israel, we just go to the hospital or we go to see our doctor. Everything is covered by Bitoch Leumi, whatever it's called, Social Security. And we don't expect any expenses, right? If we can afford it, then we would buy up on any private insurance. In the US, that's not the case. You can go bankruptcy if you don't have a proper medical coverage. So that is something that's really, really important for us to understand. Most candidates will expect that we cover the majority, if not all, of the monthly costs of the premiums for medical, dental, and vision. Also short-term disability, long-term disability. Oftentimes, if you use a PEO or a broker, those will be thrown in kind of as a bonus or minimal cost. But the major cost will be the medical policy, the monthly policy. Then, you know, we can dig down into the specifics, but we won't do that. But obviously, candidates do expect good plans with a high coverage, low deductible. That's what you'll typically see them asking about, and they'll want to get like a written sheet. And that's very common. I've seen somebody ask a while ago, is it common for candidates to ask to see this in writing before they sign an offer? Of course it is. It's a big thing that's going to affect their lives, their spouse, their children. It's really important that they do ask about it before they sign the offer, and that they don't get caught off by surprise. Then, you know, there's the 401k, yes match, no match. It really depends. Each employer does, you know, what they find right for them. But even on that, you know, you can set up a vesting schedule. So even if you do set up a 401k plan, it won't necessarily cost the company anything on day one. So just something to bear in mind. I won't dig into that because I know that we're short on time. I'll take it back to Joe and Jessica at this point.
Joe, go ahead.
I would add in that the 401k is definitely an expected thing, that candidates will expect that as a benefit. They also will expect somewhat of a match. This is our version of a pension plan. Pension plans have been phased out over the years, and standard match is usually something in the 3 to 4 to 5% range. As well as with respect to the benefits, going back to that, they will also expect that to uncover their families. That's not something that it's very rare that you would see a company only offer employee benefits. They do expect it for their dependents, and they will take advantage of that. They also will very often ask about the benefits and ask to see the specifics of that even during the interview stage. they may not want to wait until the offer stage when they're making a decision to first find out about it, because that's something that's fixed. Companies aren't going to change that. As far as other benefits, maternity leave is standard here. It's generally somewhere in the 3 to 9 months, but probably 3 to 6 months is the most common. And we do have many companies adding in paternity leave as well.
And that's not for maternity leave. It's not legislated for, though, is it? Because it is in many European countries. For example.
It's not legislated.
Yeah. So you don't have to do it, but
a rare company that only allows 2 weeks, which is ridiculous. But that's, and employers will balk on that.
Yeah. And I'll
some
just
states do have. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you please.
I was going to say some states do have a paid FMLA, and then employers kind of top off on what is paid by the local government. But yeah, mostly it's, out of the generosity of the employer, and that's definitely a policy that you need to think about. And I think that also, we're not really talking here about inclusive, diversity and inclusiveness initiatives. But I think that calling it parental leave and not maternity/paternity leave really goes a long way. So I would definitely consider that.
Oh, that's very good. Actually, that's a really good point. Yeah, thank you for that. Even for
I would also just like to pop in again to reiterate the sherm.org site, because the states really do vary by that. And one state in particular, California, is very different from the rest of the country in the sense that they have much more employee-friendly benefits than most of the other states. And so this is a topic that does vary. You were asking what is legislated, and that really does vary a lot by state and even sometimes by county. So you really do need to verify that for the location.
You're right. And actually, you just reminded me that I had planned to start this with a disclaimer, basically saying that, out of all of the different states, that there are so many regional or, state differences that we can't possibly speak to all of them. So, we're talking about, Texas, and we're talking about New York State, but even within that, there are probably some variations. So the sherm.org site is really, really important. The other thing I wanted to say here is that one thing that I've noticed since the beginning of COVID is candidates asking much earlier in the process and insisting on knowing about things like the health benefits and so on. So, people in the US have obviously really, they're much more alert, much more alive to this now than they would have been in the past, and that's been my experience anyway. So it is something that is important for companies to think about in the moment you begin thinking about your hiring process. Think about what you're planning to do there, what you're able to do. Okay, so now, we've gone through the reference check and background checks and, thought about benefits and so on. So really, like, the next logical stage now would be, to think about making an offer and what does that look like. So we wanted also just to speak briefly about the offer letter. Sam, will you start us off?
Sure. So the offer letter is kind of an agreement, in some instances, non-binding agreement between the candidate and the organization to offer employment to this candidate. Although it's not legally required in the US, it is widely, all candidates would expect it at the end of the hiring process. Some of the details that you would include are the job title, the pay, who they would report to, some details about the benefits, start date, and so on. The reason I say that it's not technically binding is that there are legitimate reasons to retract offer letters. I can give an example of, what would be reasonable and non-discriminatory reason to retract an offer letter. If you gave an offer to a candidate under specific circumstances and they sign it, and they suddenly come back to you and say, well, you know what, I'm moving to a different country and I would still like to perform this role and work for the organization. That's a valid reason to retract an offer letter and say, well, we're sorry, we're not set up to hire somebody out of the country. You wouldn't say specifically because you're moving to this country or that country, because that can come off as discriminatory. But if the company is not set up to hire somebody under different circumstances than what was previously presented to them, then that's definitely a valid reason to retract.
Very good. Thank you. Joe?
Other circumstances where the offer could be retracted, for example, in the economic downturn we had 12 years ago, if companies, it's a pretty common practice here in the US that there is a lot of campus hiring that goes on, that companies go on to college and university campuses and extend offers before students graduate, sometimes as long as even, as early as 10 months before they graduate. So circumstances can change for the company, and when it's time for that person to start, the job is no longer available to them. The business has been sold off, or there's been some other change in the business, and then the offer would be retracted. As well, candidates, as much as we would like them not to do that, candidates will sometimes accept an offer and something else comes along for them. There might be a personal change, or there might be a better offer or a counter offer that their company does. Something might happen and they renege on it. And that can happen, and there's no legal recourse for that. You just start over.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. I think that covers it, right, ladies? Okay, cool. So we're at the other end of the employment cycle now. So people have been hired successfully, and now for some reason or other, we need to let them go. So let's talk about topic of severance pay. Sam, did you want to start us off?
Sure. So as we probably all know, most states, or if not all states in America, are at-will employment states, which basically means that we can hire a person and they might be they need to provide us with a 2-week notice if they decide to leave the company, but we won't necessarily have to do the same. Under specific circumstances, we could technically tell somebody, well, you're gone tomorrow, we're sorry. That is one reason to consider offering a severance pay. A severance pay basically is a payout to the person who's leaving the company that's kind of to help them recover from the termination, right? Something that you don't have to give them, but you are giving them. Typically, you would see between 1 and 2 weeks per year that they have worked for the company, as well as at least 1 month of COBRA. COBRA, for whoever's on the line and doesn't know the term, is the continuation of benefits under the same terms that they had while they worked for the company. So it is very common to provide them with at least 1 or 2 months of paid COBRA that the company pays for. Then after that, they should be eligible. If they're not rehired or hired by a different company, they should be able to obtain COBRA and pay for it themselves. Yeah, that's more or less on that. Oh, and one more thing I will add about this is that typically you would accompany a severance pay with a severance or separation agreement, just to set out the terms of the separation and to make sure that the former employee knows that they have to waive their claims to the company so that they can't come back to you a year later and say, well, you owe me this or you owe me that. So typically you would also have them sign a separation agreement.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, thank you. Will we move on?
Getting a couple of things.
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry, I'm sorry, Joe.
That's all right. That's fine. So with that severance pay, that letter that Sam was referring to with the separation agreement, that would also spell out if there's any unused vacation. You would address that in that topic as well. And it's always a good idea for companies to actually set up a policy for how severance is handled, because it might be a severance for one department because that department got phased out, and then 6 months later, something else happens in the business and you're now severing another group of employees, and there has to be fairness from time to time. So it's really a good rule of thumb to, first of all, have a policy for that. With respect to the COBRA, many companies do pay. The way it's set up with benefits in the first place is companies are paying the lion's share of the premium, and an employee might be paying 20 or 25% of the premium. In that severance agreement, they would continue to pay, the company would continue to pay their share for whatever period of time they set out. But employees by themselves, by law, companies are required to offer COBRA. That's not an option. It's part of the benefits plan. And there's a time limit on that. And that's also set out legally. And so after the company cost sharing is over with, say 2 months in and the employee still doesn't have a job, that employee can continue on with COBRA for more than a year, just paying the full amount themselves, making up the difference from what the company used to pay. And one other thing I wanted to add is there's something called stay-on bonuses or retention agreements. It might be that a company is severing a group of employees because you're moving the office or you're selling the business. And in those circumstances, you want the business to continue, even though you might have given the employees 2 or 4 weeks notice that their job won't be there anymore. You want them to come to work every day until that facility closes. So companies will often give them a bonus to entice them to stay through that period.
Very good. Okay, super. Thank you. So actually, the might have made more sense to speak about the notice periods first, because I think we kind of covered it here as well. But is there anything else that you feel is left to say there, Sam, or on the notice periods question?
I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah. Joe, I don't think there's anything else there from your side.
One thing I would like to say is it is typical to provide 2 weeks paid notice, but some jobs just don't permit that. It might be there's company information that you're afraid that the unhappy employee might do something with your clients, or it just might be a privacy issue that you really need them to leave, in which case, yes, they could be gone today or tomorrow, but you are still going to give them at least 2 weeks pay in that circumstance.
Okay, very good. Great. Okay, let's also just focus very briefly on how COVID has affected the candidate market. Joe, I'll ask you to speak to this a little bit.
So it has really been a major change globally. I don't have to tell anybody here what's taken place. And what we have found is companies that weren't accustomed to having a hybrid model, who expected employees in the office 5 days a week, have already made the changes to enable people to work remotely. And there are many employees that, yes, their circumstances are that they can't wait to get back to the office, but there's a good number, and maybe even the majority, a lot of employees have found that they like working remotely. They like having that flexibility, and companies are going to bring people back just 2 or 3 days a week into the office. But that's going to be generally scheduled. It's not going to be a workable thing to have it just whenever. You can't have something that's unpredictable. And the whole point of having people come into the office is to have them collaborating with their team. So the best way to do that is to have those scheduled days. And it's usually 2 or 3 days a week that people will go into the office. On the caveat to that is companies such as hotels and banks that have had employees be frontline employees in the first place. It's kind of standard that the corporate employees are going to come into the office too. It just doesn't make sense to say, oh, well, you guys are the frontline employees. You don't have to, the rest of us don't have to come in. And the other caveat to that is a lot of the technology companies have already figured out how to do this. And many of them were doing it before COVID. So there's that. Oh, and there's one more thing, the hoteling model. A lot of companies have also reduced their footprint during COVID. So where they might have had 5 floors in an office building, they might only have 2 now. And so they expect that since employees are only coming in 2 days a week, they don't need their own dedicated office or workstation. So that is often a shared kind of concept as well. And people bring their own equipment with them to, like if it's a laptop or their office files with them, or they have a locker to keep them in when they're not at the office.
Yeah. So I think the point here is as well, just to remember just that kind of flexibility is what candidates are expecting much more now. And in a way, I think it also probably works really well for some of the companies that just, you don't need to maintain large office spaces, as we've learned, that it's, it's very, very feasible to actually save on that side of it there as well. So I'm going to move on to the next section, which is really about some of the legal requirements for people in the US. So there are many different types of immigrant and work visas and so on that Alex would, I'm sure, well, I'm sure, but I know for a fact that he would love to and be very able to speak about at length. But we've decided that for the purposes of this particular webinar, that what we encounter most frequently in the US when when we, meaning ER Global, when we're looking at candidates there, is that we might come across candidates that are current holders of the so-called H1b visa. So there are two things there. One is that, the new H1b visa, and then there's a transfer of the visa. And I've asked Alex to just really speak about the H1b visa transfer, because that's the most simple and kind of economical model for a company to consider hiring, just to talk us through what is involved in that process there. So Alex, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. וצהריים טובים לכולם. Okay, so there are several types of business visas or work visas or employment visas. They're all non-immigrant. Now there are immigrant visas, which is basically green cards, but we're not going to talk about it because of insufficiency of time. So obviously you're aware of the B1, B2. This is a business visitor visa or tourist visa. I'll shortly talk at length about H1b. There is a visa which is called L1. It's an intra-company or relocation visa. It's for companies having a branch or parent company, let's say in Israel, and opening a subsidiary or branch in the US, and they're relocating a manager or executive or a person with advanced knowledge to the US. There is a TN visa, it's for Mexicans and Canadians under NAFTA. There is an E3 visa, it's a temporary worker visa for Australians. There is also an E2 visa. It's been implemented about 3 years ago also for Israeli citizens. It's an investor visa. Again, if someone wants to discuss it, I'm happy to provide more information. But right now, I'll dwell more on H1b. The average processing time, if we're talking about transfer H1b, is for people who've already been selected for H1b and their H1b application was approved and they're currently working on H1b in H1b status. And let's say they found a more lucrative position or job offer from a different company. In that case, the processing times is about, there is a premium processing time, which is provided by the USS if the company pays some extra $2,500 to the USS. And in that case, you get the decision within 2 weeks. With the preparation and getting the LCA approved, it's labor conditions application about concerning the prevailing wage. We're talking about 3-4 weeks turnaround preparation and adjudication time. So it's pretty quick. Sometimes going back to what Joe and Sam talked about, the notice period. Sometimes employees are hesitant when to give the notice. So again, this is something that can be discussed for a particular case, but I know sometimes I've been asked about when to give a notice because people are not sure whether they'll be approved, even though if the petition is properly prepared and the person obviously has the necessary education. I'll shortly talk about the requirements of H1b. There is really no big risk of denial of H1b if it's a comparable position and duties, and the person obviously has the necessary education. It should be approved. Obviously, there are forms that have to be prepared. The necessary documents are diploma, transcripts, obviously resume or CV. And once everything is put together and filed with the USS, then the USS takes its time and approves. Sometimes they issue what's called request for evidence. It's called RFE. They provide some 3 months period of time to respond. Obviously, nobody needs such a long period. So within a week or 2 weeks, the response is sent back. And then the USS is another 2 weeks. To really talk about the H1b requirements, again, the cornerstone of H1b is that a person has at least a bachelor's degree in the specialty occupation. So it cannot be a generic liberal arts or even generic business administration degree. Is really disfavored by the USS. The USS wants to see a specific degree applicable to specific duties. So obviously position or title is not enough. You really have to go into details and write the bullet points, what exactly the employee will be performing on daily basis and how these duties are comparable and are based on the baggage received from the academic institution, usually it's university or college, 4 years. I guess we can move to the second.
Yeah. So yeah, what we want to show you here really is like how quick it can be, and also what approximately what the costing structure looks like. That's obviously a big consideration. So
okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so in terms of well, cost is self-evident. There are mandatory fees. It's $750 for a small company under 26 employees. There is a mandatory $500 anti-fraud fee and $460 it's regular fee for Form I-129. As I previously mentioned, the premium processing fee is optional, but in the real world, actually it went up from $1,410, $1,440. It went up to $2,500 last October. USS is making money. USS is the immigration service in the US. But usually small companies or mid companies, they almost always, if they want to steal an employee, they always use the premium processing time, because then we're talking really about a few weeks as opposed to regular process could take months. It's just not practical. Now, I just wanted to dwell on one point. When somebody changes, it's not really changing the status, it's changing the employer. So let's say somebody's working from company A on H1b, and your candidate, your client is hiring a candidate for H1b. The person gets continuation. He can apply for extra 3 years, because usually H1b is for 3 years and 3 years, so 6 years altogether. But when you change employers, you can apply for a new block of 3 years. Sometimes the person needs to travel. That's the difference. There is a difference between status and visa. So visa is something that you get abroad at the consulate. Usually the visa for the previous from the previous employer, because there is an annotation on the visa for what company the person worked. So still the visa is valid, even if the employee joined a new company, but at some point the visa will expire, and at that point the employee will go back, let's say, to Tel Aviv and apply for a new visa just to extend so he can return to the US and continue his employment. Well, back to the fees, there are legal fees, obviously. They vary, each lawyer decides what his fees are. As I said before, the $750, which are mandatory for small company, for bigger company, more than 25 employees, it's $1,500. So I just wanted to make a point that there always has to be a correlation between a degree, as I said, and the duties. So for example, if we're talking about a software developer, so the obvious degrees is the computer science or something in IT. You cannot really take somebody who has a degree in electric engineering or something different and say, well, this guy has worked for 3 years and he has experience. No, but there is one exception. If the person has worked, basically there is an equivalence of 1 year at university to be equal to 3 years as work experience. So instead of 40 years, so 40 years is the usual bachelor's duration. So if 4 years is the university time, then 12 years is equal to work experience. Okay, so if somebody has real work experience and it can be proven, in that case, what's the evidence? It's in basically employment letters and pay stubs and maybe LinkedIn. In that case, it's possible to also make a evaluation of the person's prior experience. Sometimes you can combine. So for example, a person has an associate degree, 2 years, and then you need extra 6 years of work experience. But I would say 95% of all H1Bs, they're based on a full either bachelor's degree. Sometimes you have a master's degree. or even PhD, but what really matters is the person has a bachelor's degree. So if he has a master's degree, that's great, but it doesn't really add unless the person earned this master's degree from a US institution. And in that case, if we're talking about an H1b capped case, which is the initial situation where the person needs to even qualify for H1b, and there is a lottery. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but in that case, there is a priority because there is an extra cap for H1b masters.
Okay, that's a lot of detail, Alex. I know I know that in your head it's all perfectly arranged. I think for the regular person, we just kind of hear what we need to hear. So thank you very much for that. I think that's clearly it's something that needs to be handled on a case by case basis. But I think the main takeaway is that point one, it's something that is very possible. I'm sorry, not thank you yet. No, I'm not thanking anyone yet. The first point is that it's very possible. It's really pretty quick to do it. And the second point is that it's actually not that expensive. I mean, that's I think the main takeaway that I'm getting from this anyway. Clearly, there's a lot of expertise required in order to make that happen, and that's why we have people like you. So, having said that, thank you so much, Alex, for that, and for agreeing to summarize and just share a tiny little piece of your knowledge with us. And now it is time for me to thank you all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because there are questions that have been coming in. So I'd like to move to that and give people a chance to ask some of the questions that we've been seeing in the chat, which I haven't been following very closely. But I think Mary has been looking at them. Mary, if you are able to pick out anything in particular, I'm only looking at it now.
I'm going to look at the last ones and then to the back. So Ella was asking, what's the common practice for relocation package when moving from one state to another?
Okay. So I think I can, if it's okay, I think I'll take that because we did discuss that, meaning myself and the panelists in putting this together. So I think the quickest answer there is no really common practice on this. So there's nothing legislated and it's really up to everyone. What the company needs to know for themselves is where you're going to be relocating to and what you're planning to cover. If you are going to relocate someone within the US, the typical cost to cover would be like the cost of moving. So it could be moving vans and so on. It could be flights, and there could be, I think, Joe, you were making the point, I can't remember whether it was Sam or Joe at the moment, but that, there could also be a question of covering just the movement, the actual moving vans, whatever, and potentially also to make some contribution to the rental or to the real estate cost of, purchasing a new home, something along those lines. All of these things are possible. They're not necessarily expected. And for sure, there isn't like any law about it. Would that summarize it, Sam and Joe? Do you think?
I would like to add some clarifiers to that. So first of all, at the executive level, they will expect some assistance. So if you're talking about somebody with 20 years experience coming into a senior level, they will expect you to pay some of the costs of buying and selling a home. They will expect you to pay some of the costs of breaking a lease if it's an apartment. But on the more junior level, yes, you're right that, they'll look at the household goods. But another way companies get around this so that they don't have to deal with it is to cover it with a sign-on bonus. And they'll simply say, we'll offer you a $10,000 or $15,000 sign-on bonus to help offset the moving costs. And there's no need in that scenario for the person to submit any expenses or do anything specific. And that's become a really popular way to do it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I see another question here there's the question from Revital. I'll just read it out. As employer, how can we estimate the healthcare coverage of a candidate and their dependents? Is SHRM.org a good place for that or not really even? It just depends on the state.
So,
yeah.
If I understand the question correctly, and Revital, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what she wants to understand is how can we compare what the candidate is saying that they currently have and with what we're offering. I think that's what the question is. The major terms that you'll hear candidates speak about are deductible. The lower the deductible, the better for the candidate. That's kind of, I'm going to use a Hebrew term here, השתתפות עצמית. That's what deductible basically is. That's what the candidate has to pay before the insurance kicks in and starts covering anything. So the lower it is, the better for the candidate. Another term is copay. Candidates want to see a low copay so that when they see their doctor, they don't have to spend $100 per visit. Typically, they would expect more like 20, 25 per visit. That's more reasonable. So I think I understood your question right, Revital. If not, let me know. I can try to help.
Yeah, Revital, I'm looking for you if you're still here, if that made sense. Feel free to pop in. Otherwise, we can move on. Yeah, but I mean, we can also follow up afterwards by email, guys. So for anyone that doesn't get their question answered, don't worry. We'll figure it out. Okay, I'm also seeing here from Arkal Automotive to everybody. What is the common practice for vacation days paid up front? So not accrued, how much and for whom? Does that question make sense?
So I think, yeah, I think most companies will probably take the accrual approach rather than upfront grant. However, you can give employees the flexibility of taking time off before they actually accrued those days. I believe it's legal. Don't take me by the word. Definitely go and check it up afterwards. But I believe it is legal if an employee took more days than they actually accrued and then a termination took place, you could recover those days if they didn't actually accrue that time and you paid for it. Again, check me on this one.
Okay, good. Thank you. Joe, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah, I would. So,
Okay.
you know, again, we'll refer people back to SHRM or other websites for seeing what's legal, because it does vary by state. But it's a pretty common practice that if the vacation is granted annually, 2 weeks or whatever it might be for the year, and the employee leaves with having already taken more than they earn, it's usually not pulled back. It's not typically clawed back. But other times you can see that the vacation policy is written in such a way that says you earn 1 day a month or whatever it might be. In that case, then it is accrued. There's also, companies have different policies about whether or not people can carry them over. So very often they'll say, if you haven't used all your vacation in the calendar year granted, you have the next 3 months to use it. And now this year in particular, companies are all looking at their vacation policies for people who were unable to take vacation time in 2020. There's now a big push for wanting to get that vacation in, and how have companies handled that? That's a case-by-case basis.
Okay, good. Thank you. Another question I have here as well. How far back does the background check typically check? Is that something that is specified by the company that wants to check it, or?
So that's, again, a case-by-case basis. I can tell you that the current company I work for, we check 7 years back. So we ask for their previous addresses 7 years back with from to dates. And that's the farthest back I've seen. When it comes to employment verification and education verification, then that obviously would change. Most companies will check 3 employers back, and education whenever it took place, right? So that's what I've seen.
Okay, good. Joe, do you have anything to add there?
I would say the same. The education can clearly be at any point in time. So that there's no time limit on that you will go back however far it takes to get the education criteria.
Joe, I think you're frozen for me anyway.
For me too.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Joe, still? Okay, I think we'll move on, and hopefully Joe's connection will stabilize again in a moment, and she'll have heard what I'm saying, although it's possible not. Let me just. This is the beauty of having to do meetings like this. There's also further suggestions from what to ask instead of tell us about yourself. Have you got creative approaches to that, Sam, that you want to share?
Sure. So I think a very common icebreaker here in the US is anything about the weather, about sports. That's what Americans like to speak about. So try to break the ice in a different way. If you're not comfortable talking about sports, try to pinpoint something about their resume or their profile or whatever in their background that you can ask about. And that will probably lead to some more informal information if that's what you're looking for. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
Okay. Arkal, did you want to come in there for a moment? I see you're writing. Just like, is there something special that you're looking for there? Are you just trying to, like, are you asking the question from the point of view of establishing a rapport with the candidate, or are you actually thinking, how else can I fish out some more interesting information?
I think that was someone else's question.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not my
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Okay.
No, that's okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I don't know. But the way it's, well, whoever asked the question, if you want to clarify, if there was something special there that we can address, feel free to barge in. From what I see, I'm scrolling through the list of questions here. A lot of people asking whether we can share the presentation, and yes, we will. So there's obviously a lot to take in there. Is there anyone else? I feel like, I think we've covered the questions here that I can see. Is there anyone else that wants to jump in with a question at this point? Oh, I've missed one question actually from Alex Bird, one of our panelists. Okay, is there a risk for non-compete issues to arise during employment verification references? Not sure. Does anyone want to address that? I think usually if there's a non-compete clause, then that's something that the candidate would usually kind of signal during the interview process, and it's not something that would arise at that end. If I'm understanding the correctly. Is there anyone else that wants to say something there? Sam?
You are able to ask that, and it is, something that you would want to know about if it's key.
Yeah, exactly. So just ask if there is any sort of an issue there. Okay. So yeah, so aside from that, I think that we have everything from the point of view of this. Is there anyone else, I'll ask one more time, is there anyone else that wants to ask a question? Don't be shy. Please feel free to switch on your microphone and ask it, or type it if you feel more comfortable. I feel like there's such a lot of different aspects to this, such a lot of information here that maybe it's hard to identify something in particular. But if there aren't further questions, I'm going to put it down to that, we've done such brilliant work preparing this. We've really just like check marked everything, all of the boxes. That's what I'm going to take from it, unless somebody stops me and tells me different. Okay, guys, I think that we're probably about ready to wrap it up in that case. I don't want to keep people. It's late for the folks in Israel. I think we've done sterling work here today. So I just want to say again, just mainly to thank the panelists for all of the time and effort they've put into this and pulling all this together, and for sharing their time with us today and last week and the weeks previous to this. So we really, really appreciate Joe Treitman and Sam Zohar and Alex Bird. All of us are here. If you do have follow-up questions, you can always contact Miri or myself at ER Global, and we'll put you in touch with someone, or we'll point you in the right direction for more information. And Miri, was there anything that you wanted to say before we?
No, just wanted to thank everyone, so you can wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Yeah. So thank you very, very much to the panelists for your time. Thank you for everyone who was attending. Hope you got what you needed out of it. Wishing you all a lovely evening, and we'll see you next time in the next webinar that ER pulls together for you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for doing a really great webinar, lots of information. Thank you, Smadar, Alex, and Joe. It was really interesting. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Erev tov.
Thank you, Alex. I know that was hard for you to contain yourself to that little piece. I think you belong at the front of a lecture hall. So, yeah, there we go. So Alex, obviously, if there are follow-up questions or people have requirements in this direction, we know where to go. I've approached you before with
Sounds good.
questions. So,
Thank you very much.
Okay,
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Bye-bye.
I'm going to
Bye-bye.
stay here until everyone's gone, so don't wait for me to leave.
Okay, bye.
Okay, take care.